Hey there, I'm Betsy Lehman. Today I'll be presenting some research that my colleagues and I have done at Michigan Tech regarding human factors and aviation maintenance over the last 30 years. So human factors issues in aviation maintenance were interesting in the 1990s, and they're just as interesting and relevant now. One way that we can explore this problem is by looking at NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System, or ASRS reports, as other research has done. So maintenance has been identified as a contributing factor in many NTSB reports over the last 30 years, including these examples I put on the screen here. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the Alaska Airlines incident that Dr. Sabrina Woods discussed in a talk on Wednesday. Additionally, aviation has changed. The number of flights have increased, and there's an expectation for quick turnaround on flights, both of which can lead to a greater potential for issues in maintenance to occur. So this has remained a relevant subject. As I mentioned, previous research has examined maintenance incidents based on ASRS reports, starting in 1995 by Elizabeth Vienot and Barbara Kahnke. They coded 95 reports on the error type, contributing factor, and operational outcome. Subsequently, a maintenance error report was added in 1996. Analyses have been done over reports from the 90s, the mid-2000s, and the 2010s. All of these studies broadly found similar patterns of results, mostly that the most common errors made in maintenance were procedural, as in procedures were done incorrectly or not done at all. However, they all used different coding schemes and procedures, even when broadly examining the same factors, and some included more aviation types under the FAA than others did. And also, while they all covered different time frames with a little overlap, they're not making direct comparisons of results, in part due to the different methods used to analyze and pull these reports. Which brings us back to the point of this study. Has the distribution of errors involving maintenance issues changed over the last 30 years? In 1995, Beth and Barb were examining if ASRS had maintenance incidents included and what they actually told us. And now we're trying to see if anything has changed and what it tells us if it has or has not changed. So to do this, we analyzed ASRS reports for Title 14, Part 121 flights that cited maintenance-related incidents between 2010 and 2020, stopping just before the pandemic. Because we were searching for maintenance incidents using the text search, we excluded any reports where maintenance was called but didn't contribute to the error. This left us with 333 reports to analyze out of the initial 491 that were returned based on the inclusion criteria. Here's an example of an ASRS report in Excel. You get 96 columns of information. So for our analyses, we didn't just rely on the pre-coded categories and coded based on multiple fields, but mostly the narratives and callbacks, which were provided directly by the incident reporters, who were primarily pilots, flight crew, and maintenance crew. We use the same coding scheme that Vienot and Kahnke used in their 1995 study, and you can see examples of these definitions in the table on the right. We coded each ASRS report over 3 levels, so the type of error, which could be the part, procedure, documentation, or something else, the causal and contributing factor, which could be individual actions, team actions, communication, procedures, tools, or something else, and the operational outcome, which could be a delay at the gate, an error return, flying to the destination, or something else. For each report, we only assigned 1 code per level. You can see that on a subset of our data, the 2 independent coders achieved very good inter-rater reliability on all 3 of these levels, on an average of around 20 reports for each round of training coding. As many of you already know, Cohen's kappa is a percent agreement adjusted for chance agreement. Typically a 0.7 is a really good Cohen's kappa in linguistics coding, and here we wanted to reach at least a 0.8, and we did. So now I'll get into the results of these analyses. So first we have the error types. The 2010 to 2020 data are represented here on the yellow, and the 1986 to 1992 data are represented here in gray. You can see that procedural errors in maintenance were the most common, making up a little more than half of all incidents studied in both time points. In other words, procedures being done incorrectly, not done at all, or the wrong procedure is being done. The other interesting thing here is the change in part errors, meaning faulty or incorrect parts used or not having the appropriate part altogether. This is much more common in 2020 than it was in 1992. Next, I want to briefly show you the 2020 results on error types as they relate to contributing factors. I want to point out that a procedural type of error refers to someone doing the procedure incorrectly, whereas a procedure contributing factor refers to the procedure itself being inaccurate or poorly designed independently of a user's actions, just to be clear when you're reading this contingency table. So using a chi-squared test, we found a significant association between error type and contributing factor. You can see in the contingency table on the left, procedural errors were far more likely than other errors to be caused by individual and by team actions. While less common, procedural errors were still more likely than other errors to be caused by issues with communication, meaning they were likely to be impacted by shift changes or having to hand off to another team or type of crew. And here are the association of error types as they relate to operational outcomes. Again, we found that the operational outcomes were significantly related to error types as shown in the contingency table on the right. Procedural errors were more likely than part errors to be caught at the gate and result in a delayed flight, while part errors were more likely than procedural errors to result in an air return or having to land immediately en route. So these different errors have different impacts regarding safety, flight crew decision-making, and passenger experience. Next, I want to return to our theme of comparing maintenance incident reports from 2010 to 2020 to those from 1986 to 1992. So in a nutshell, reporting has increased from the 90s to the 2010s, going from 95 maintenance-related incident reports to 333 in the ASRS database. The fact that maintenance was added as an incident category in 1996 may be a part of this increase, as is the fact that there are just more flights now. Procedural errors have remained the most common type of errors, accounting for a little over half of maintenance-related incidents in both the 90s and in the 2010s. Part errors, though, as I mentioned, have increased by about 10 percentage points, now accounting for almost a third of all maintenance-related incidents in the 2010s. Finally, then and now, over half of flights continue on to their destinations even when errors are caught. However, far more maintenance errors were being caught at the gate in the 2010s than they were in the 90s, meaning that these errors are being noticed by flight crew during pre-flight checks or taxi and result in a delay of the flight. Maintenance errors that are caught after takeoff and result in air returns or en route landings have decreased by about 10 percentage points from the 90s to the 2010s overall as well. So what do these results mean? For the last 30 years, procedural issues in aviation maintenance have remained a problem, and perhaps they are one that can be solved via improved training on both doing and communicating procedures, given that these were frequently due to handoff communication in addition to individual and team actions. It's notable that time was often mentioned in the narratives here, with maintenance crew feeling pressured to resolve procedures quickly so that planes can return to service. So broader, more systemic solutions may be necessary. However, most of these issues were discovered early, resulting most often in just delays. And while this isn't fun for passengers or crews, it's an improvement in safety. Given the increase in gate delays, decrease in air returns, but similar proportions of procedural errors from the 90s to the 2010s, a positive interpretation may be that it's possible the type of procedural errors has changed. So they may be minor or more solvable now than they were 30 years ago, which would be good. As previous studies have done, thematic coding of the content of reports could examine this more specifically. On the other hand, part issues in maintenance have increased during the 2010s as compared to the 90s and early 2000s, rising from consistently around 10% of errors to 32% of errors now, which is especially concerning from a safety standpoint, as these were frequently discovered during the flight and necessitated landing. This may be a new place to shift airline safety attention. These errors were almost exclusively attributed to individual and team actions and not issues with any of the resources or systems provided as well. So this is another area where more information on the context surrounding these errors would help to identify some solutions. Previous analyses discuss fatigue and momentary lapses in memory, as well as time pressure and lack of knowledge in relation to these errors, for example, but more research would be needed. One limitation of this study is that since it's based on ASRS reports, we're only capturing what people are reporting and not every incident that actually happens. So we're getting a glimpse into this real-world problem in order to see where we need to focus future efforts. Despite this, it is still really useful to examine these reports using the same coding scheme as VNOT and Kankakee used originally, so that we can see how maintenance issues have changed and better understand what we should do for future research. Some ideas for future research are, as just mentioned, performing content analysis of the procedural errors found in ASRS maintenance-related incident reports, such as research that has been done by Geibel and colleagues previously. This would give a better insight into whether procedural errors are becoming more minor and how big of a problem time pressure really is, for example. This could also be done for part errors reported as well, to get deeper into the contributing factors beyond just what we were coding for as individual and team actions. So future research could also involve using completely different methods to explore procedural errors, such as getting into individual and team cognition of maintenance workers themselves. Similar studies have been done to examine these frameworks using archival reports and direct observation. In any case, future research on the kinds of maintenance-related incidents that have remained common and have become more common in the last 30 years will be necessary for identifying effective solutions. So here are my references, and the full paper will be available in the proceedings. At this point, I want to say thanks for listening, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now or email me later. And enjoy this view of our very tiny airport in the Keweenaw up at Michigan Tech. Thank you.